Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our 25th, can you believe it, SWOG webinar. Tonight we are joined by Brown, self-acclaimed scatty professor, but I would prefer to say brilliant professor. He's been a long time SWOG supporter. He's attended loads of our webinars, and this will be the second one that he's actually hosting. So tonight we are looking at the microbiome and the permeable differentiated membrane between us and soil and worms. And I'll leave it at that because Brown is going to do a much better job of explaining it than I ever could. So over to you, Brown. Take it away.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Yes, well, welcome everybody. Thanks very much for logging in. This arose out of a conversation between Sarah and me, following on from my last presentation as part of this series, where we started but didn't really go into things like the human microbiome and how this might be related to what's in our natural or human-made environment. Things like how chemicals out of plants get inside us, how we affect the environment, and so on. So I thought I'd elaborate on that. I've got some visual aids prepared, which hopefully you can see on screen now after a little bit of faff to try and get Zoom to share the file. The permeable body, how the environment gets under our skin and how we get under the skin, if you will, of our environment. Well, I'll start talking and we'll see how we get on. As usual, you can post questions or points for discussion in the chat. I'll aim to go on for, let us say, about 40 minutes or so, and that'll leave some time for discussion questions. Because this is crowdsourced information, as it were, do feel free to chip in with your own knowledge and experiences and so on, and we'll discuss those later as we get to them. Right. Well, one of the obvious things that possibly many of us have heard of is this concept of phytoncides. Phytos are plants and sides, well, things that kill stuff. These are not compounds or chemicals that kill the plants themselves. They're part of plants' immune systems. They've been around for quite a while. I was surprised to learn that the early Soviet biologist Boris Tonkin first characterized these way back in 1928. But they've become of greater interest recently, particularly with the growing popularity from Japan of things like forest bathing. Phytoncides, as they're characterized and studied at the moment, at least, the term relates to volatile compounds, things that evaporate into the air fairly readily. They seem to be associated especially with the conifers, pines, cedars, things like that. But other broadleaf trees, plants, herbaceous plants secrete them. Um, Pine forests, according to Ducker and Ardeline in 2010, released something like the equivalent of 5 kilograms of volatile phytoncides into the atmosphere per day. And, it's a matter of common observation that plants have a fairly good immune system. If you just buy fruit from the supermarket, in the shop and in our homes, it can last pretty well. But if you mash it up and disrupt the operation of the immune system, it goes off pretty quickly. Similarly, in our woodlands, brushwood and windfall branches and offcuts can hang around for quite a long time. But if you put them through a wood chipper, and thus expose their inner surfaces to the air, disrupt their immune systems, they rot down very nicely into compost. So, if you don't chip, you might be waiting 5 years for something that you can use, but if you chip it, you'll have some nice compost for the next season. Well, plants get, many of the ills that flesh is there to, they can even get cancer. When you see lumps and bumps on the sides of trees, in some cases at least, that might be a cancer. Um, okay, so there are commonalities between ourselves and the plants and fungal kingdoms. Actually, I don't know quite what you think of this, but when I was a kid, plants and fungi were seen as part of the same kingdom. Increasingly, in recent years, people have argued that fungi merit a kingdom all of their own. Um, so if anybody's got any views on that, do pop them in the chat and we can discuss them later. Um, okay, so the conifers, things like cedar and pine, but also the alliums, onions and garlics. Well, they're pretty whiffy things anyway, so that's understandable. Robinia, locust, tea tree, um, and phytoncides, when we're exposed to them, affect our immune systems too. Uh, for example, they seem to stimulate activity of our killer cells, our natural killer cells, our T cells. Um, they encourage us to produce cytotoxic effector molecules. They may have an anti-inflammatory effect. They may help us reduce blood glucose. So if you're at that phase in your life where you're thinking about becoming diabetic, a bit of forest bathing, particularly in a pine forest, might be beneficial. They may reduce cortisol, they may aid relaxation, they may promote better sleep. All these kinds of things have been ascribed to phytoncides, or exposing the body, exposing ourselves to phytoncides. As you might imagine, doing research on this can be a little bit difficult. How do you distinguish the effects of the chemicals themselves from the effect on our well-being of going for a nice walk in the woods? Well, that might improve mood, reduce blood sugar, reduce cortisol, help us sleep better, and so on. So, in looking at the literature prior to delivering this talk, I noticed that there are a number of authors who are advocating, well, what we want to do is randomized controlled trials, a bit like the sort of thing you might do if testing the effectiveness of a new drug. You have, let's imagine a very simple experiment where you have a control group that doesn't get the phytoncides and an identical experimental group, intervention group that does in laboratory setting. No nice walks in the woods, no dappled sunshine, no birdsong. These are interference variables. And then you can see if there's a difference in terms of any of these biomarkers that I've just mentioned. I don't think much of that kind of work has been done so far, but people are encouraging researchers to think about doing so to try and pin down the effects of phytoncides a bit more clearly. And also anti-cancer activity has been noted by Lee and his colleagues in a number of papers in the early 2000s. May be useful against MRSA and Enterococcus. Um, Particularly phytoncides derived from the Sephora plant. They're antibacterial agents. MRSA, Staphylococcus aureus. What a wonderful microbe Staphylococcus aureus is. It's not always very kind to us, but when you think about its versatility and adaptability, um, back in the early 2000s, it was a major source of healthcare associated infections. Those of us with very long memories, going back to the 1970s, might remember toxic shock syndrome. And that was eventually ascribed to Staphylococcus aureus. Around about that time, Staphylococcus aureus had decided it liked living in tampons, and this was producing a whole variety of symptoms in women who used tampons. And because the symptoms were quite varied, it took them quite a while to pin it down to Staphylococcus aureus. It's a bit like blue tits deciding all around the world that they were going to peck through the foil tops of milk bottles and drink the cream. Um, Nobody knows quite how it happened all at the same time in so many parts of the world. Um, if there's such a thing as reincarnation, I'd like to come back as Staphylococcus aureus. My goodness me, what a versatile creature I would be. Um, anyway, some of the phytoncides under study, especially those from the Sephora plant, can be effective against methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus uh, as well. This sort of thing is very interesting because, as you're probably aware, there are a lot of concerns being expressed in the scientific community, in the medical community, that we're going to run out of antibiotics, or the antibiotics we have, many common microbes that cause illnesses will develop resistance or already have developed resistance. So the search for new antibiotic agents is particularly important and particularly acute. So maybe some of these plant-derived compounds have a great future ahead of them. Okay, so that's a bit about phytoncides. Let's move on and think about something else. Microplastics, something which seems to be a major concern at the moment. Actually, that picture there is not so much microplastics, that's more like macroplastics. That's a picture of, well, it's my land actually, and there's a small stream just below the line of sight of that photo. And my goodness me, a lot of plastic appears in that stream, fertilizer bags, animal feed bags, that plastic bale wrap. Um, People these days say things like, oh, the oceans are 70% plastic. Well, I know where it comes from. It comes from the farmer next door to me. He loves plastic bags. In fact, most of his tractor is made out of plastic bags. Most of the windows in the cab of his tractor are now plastic bags. He's still got a glass windscreen, so you can see where he's going, but he seems to produce a great many. In fact, famously, many moons ago, Andy Warhol said that he would like to be made of plastic. Well, had he lived a few decades later, that might have become a possibility. Uh, Now, these are plastic bags and bale wrap and so forth I've retrieved from my own land. And, I what I do actually is I bring them back to our house in Leicester and put them in the recycling because there's not a whole lot else you can do with them. Uh, so it's not too bad at the moment, but sometimes I have to have a real purge on picking up the plastic. Microplastics apparently fragments of plastic that are less than 5 millimeters. That's not actually very micro. That's more about the size of a grain of rice. But nanoplastics are really, really small. They're less than a thousandth of a millimeter, is the definition of nanoplastics that you'll often find in the literature. Okay, and these accumulate in many parts of the biome, including in our own bodies. They've been found, well, first of all, there's some evidence that we're ingesting more microplastics than ever. Six-fold increase in ingestion from 1990 to 2018, according to Zhu and Yu. And they show up in body fluids, saliva, blood, sputum, breast milk, found in organs such as the liver, kidney, spleen, brain, gonads, and bones. In fact, I have a colleague at the place where I work, De Montfort University, and she's an engineer by background, and she reckons that microplastics, in her view, I don't know how well supported this is in the academic literature, but in her view, microplastics may be responsible for the declines in fertility that can be observed in many of the world's wealthier nations, in Europe and the United States and Japan and so on. Again, I'm not sure how well supported that is in the academic literature, but it's her belief. Particularly as they tend to accumulate in the gonads. By 2035 there'll be enough microplastics in our gonads to make an entire credit card. Well, that'll be useful, won't it? You just have to swipe your junk on the card reader and buy all sorts of stuff. Talk about sitting on a gold mine, eh? Um, uh, they're found in the plaques that develop in arteries. They've been implicated in dementia. People suffering from dementia seem to have more microplastics in their bodies and their nervous systems. Now, it may be that that's uh, possibly a cause of dementia, but again, correlation doesn't necessarily mean causation. Um, Neither is association explanation. It may be that one of the symptoms of dementia is loss of the ability to eliminate these things from our bodies as well. But even so, there are major concerns being voiced about their health effects. Maybe the plastics that appear in the in the environment and find their way into us also tend to absorb metals, the usual suspects like mercury, lead, all the nasties. And thus the neurotoxic effects can be compounded. Okay, so that's a little bit about plastics. Um, what else have we got in the Chamber of Horrors tonight? Oh, pesticides, of course. Um, uh, these observations and on subsequent slides come from a piece I found in Toxicology Reports, the journal, by Shekhar et al. In 2024. And they provide a handy dandy little diagram of pesticides being sprayed, and they show how this finds its way into, at least found their way into the groundwater, into watercourses, into aquatic life, fish, for example, and find their way into the human body. They find their way into the groundwater and find their way, hence, into drinking water, especially where this might be extracted from wells. So there's a kind of pesticide cycle. And again from Shekhar et al. Here's a few of the usual suspects. Pyrethroids, it's pyrethrum. Uh, this comes from chrysanthemums and was discovered a long time ago and is often used as an insecticide. Um, Now, I should point out that these symptoms here are symptoms of acute poisoning with these compounds. Um, so, unsurprisingly, you see symptoms like vomiting, nausea, um, that kind of thing. It's the sort of thing the body does when it's been poisoned with anything, never mind pesticides. Um, so, pyrethroids have been associated with headache, vomiting, facial paresthesia. Paresthesia is like that pins and needles symptom that's of interest to neurologists. Dizziness, nausea, burning sensations, muscle fasciculations. Fasciculations are like twitches or spasms, itching, loss of consciousness, low energy, altered awareness and convulsions, disruptions to immune system, and glucose metabolism. So that's pyrethroids. There's the organophosphates and organochlorines, salivation, lacrimation, urination, defecation. Again, the sorts of things that a body might do when it's trying to eliminate toxins. Um, Organochlorines have also been associated with things like mental confusion and disorientation, endocrine disruption, and so on. Um, okay, again, these are acute exposure uh, symptoms. What's perhaps a little more difficult to pin down and perhaps somewhat more debatable is the effects of low-level exposure of the kind that we might get from farmers, for example, farm workers, if they're regularly applying these chemicals in the course of their work, they seem to be perhaps more likely to suffer from neurodegenerative problems, cancer, and so on. Is it the pesticides and the herbicides, or is it something else that they might be exposed to in the environment? Um, I have another acquaintance who's been a farmer most of his life. He's kind of retired now, and he was very concerned about the potential carcinogenic effects of bracken, for example. The spores of the bracken plant have sometimes been implicated in cancer. So there's lots of things that farmers might get exposed to, but there's a concern that some of the long-term effects are particularly acute in farmers. Um, what else have we got? We've got triazines. These are some of the common weed killers that you're probably familiar with. Things like sodium chlorate, things like glyphosate. Um, Glyphosate is very, very widely used as a herbicide, both domestically and in agriculture. Um, these, it is claimed, might increase the likelihood of thyroid, breast, and prostate cancer, have hormonal effects on people. Um, and there's some organizations, as you're probably aware, like Pesticide Action, or was it Action on Pesticides, I think it's called, that's campaigning quite vigorously for glyphosate to be banned. It is claimed, particularly by the manufacturers, that glyphosate is readily broken down, readily degraded when it hits the soil. But equally, there are concerns that it will find its way into the human food chain, find its way into groundwater, into watercourses. That's one of the contentious ones at the moment. Oh, the synthetic auxins as well. They're the ones that a lot of people complain about. The ones that are used as for eliminating broadleaf weeds from grassland. And these are the ones that are remarkably persistent. Animals eat the grass and the synthetic auxins come through in the manure. So if you get a lot of nice compost or manure to put on your garden or your freshly planted trees, if there's synthetic auxins in there, then your plants may not grow at all, or if they do grow, they're very stunted. And these can hang around for a very long time. They go through animals' guts relatively unchanged. They can persist in the material, whether it's rotting hay and straw or manure for quite a long time, for a number of years. And once you've spread it on your garden, well, they're very difficult to get rid of. You probably have to bag up all your soil and treat it as hazardous waste and buy some new. Um, in terms of the effect on humans, maybe arguably they're associated with endocrine disruption, reproductive toxicity, possibly some kinds of cancers. Uh, on the other hand, in high doses, synthetic auxins tend not to prove fatal, unlike some of these other things. There are cases in the literature where people have attempted suicide, self-poisoning overdose with synthetic auxin-based herbicides, and by and large they have survived, as far as I can tell. But over a period of time, exposure has been claimed to be associated with things like cancer and endocrine disruption as well. So that's a bit about pesticides. Let's have another little aperitif. The microbiome. Uh, a characteristic microbial community occupying a reasonably well-defined habitat which has distinct physiochemical properties. The term thus not only refers to the microorganisms involved, but also encompasses their theatre of activity. Um, Now, for a long time, since I was a kid, people were talking about gut flora, gut fauna, that kind of thing. But more recently, the term microbiome is increasingly used for these kinds of things. So there might be a human microbiome, things that live inside us or on our surface. There might be a soil microbiome. Well, there usually is a soil microbiome. There might be a plant microbiome. There may be things that are specific to particular plants or to the plant kingdom more generally. And here's a little diagram. This is just a kind of introductory diagram that I found on the internet somewhere with some of the microbes. Some of them are bacteria, some of them, I see the Candida albicans there, some of them are fungal. Um, so there's Staphylococci and Streptococci. Um, Helicobacter pylori, that's the one that's associated with stomach ulcers, and so on. Some of them you might recognize, like our old friends E. coli down there at the bottom left. Um, there's another. Oh, and here we are. You probably recognize him if you're into gardening. There's Charles Dowding, the no-dig gardener, who promotes the use not of digging, but you make compost and you spread it on your garden. And Thus, you can eliminate the need to cultivate or dig if you've got fresh compost, and particularly if you've got compost that's heated up as part of the decomposition process. Once you get above, let's say, 60 Celsius, it tends to kill the weed seeds. And there's loads of YouTube videos that he's made. There's lots of rather attractive, lavishly illustrated books that you can buy. There's courses that you can go on. And there's almost a complete Charles Dowding, I almost called him Charles Darwin there, a Charles Dowding ecosystem that you can be a part of if you're interested in this kind of thing. He's a, lovely, softly spoken old guy, but actually, when you see him with his knife, a different side of him comes out. You should see him hacking the tops and tails off turnips or the stalks off cauliflowers. He's somebody who's clearly no stranger to handling an edged weapon. You know, um, and it's really tough stuff. It takes a bit of strength to put a blade through some of these things, but he's an expert. Anyway, the reason I put him up is I saw in one of his videos some time ago him saying something along the lines of, well, the microbiome, the bacteria in the soil are the same as the bacteria in our guts. And he pulled the carrot out of the ground and rubbed it on his trousers and ate it. So in his case, perhaps that's true. Uh, in fact, this is a little bit more complicated. Uh, some microbes are habitat specialists, especially if they've got anaerobic metabolism, if they don't need much oxygen. And there are things that tend to live in the guts, the things that tend to live in plants, things that tend to live in the soil. Uh, Whereas there are some microbes which are generalists or can live in a whole variety of different environments. And you can see the names of many of them there. But there's a what Ma et al. Called the soil plant gut microbiome axis, and uh, that's a paper. I think it's open access if anybody's interested in reading about this further, where um, they talk about the relationships between these different microbiomes, and some microbes seem to be able to pass between these different environments. Um, uh, Such as, and I've written some of these down in the hope that I'll be able to pronounce them properly. Things that live in the guts tend to be ones that can eat mucin. Mucin is a glycoprotein that's in the mucus that's secreted by the insides of our guts. And things that can live on mucin tend to do quite well in our intestines. Uh, for example, there's Akkermansia uh, muscifilia, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, muscifilia. Oh, it likes mucin, like a lot of these things. And it seems to be associated with reduced obesity when we've got a healthy colony of Akkermansia muscifilia inside us. It seems to be able to uh, it has something to do with our diabetes risk. Again, if there's a healthy colony of Akkermansia muscifilia inside us, we are at less risk of diabetes. So the point I'm making then is that the things that live inside us have an important role in many cases in our metabolisms, our sense of health, in terms of the illnesses that we are vulnerable to. Another one, the lactobacillus group, lactobacillus. According to this diagram, they are generalists. They, when they're associated with soil or plants, they seem to be able to promote plant growth. They seem to be able to process metals contaminants that have found their way into the soil as well, such that, if, let us say, lead or mercury is in there, perhaps as a result of mineral deposits or some sort of anthropogenic contamination, lactobacillus are the ones that can make this less hazardous, less harmful. Um, There's another one, habitat specialist. Faecalibacterium prosnitzi, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. Yes, as you can see from the name, it comes out in your poo. Uh, but that's involved in fermenting fibers. So dietary fiber, it's the Faecalibacterium prosnitzi that involved in breaking down those fibers. And they make quite useful things out of fiber. They're like, little single-celled basket makers in a sense. They turn the fiber into short-chain fatty acids, which have anti-inflammatory effects, which can reduce the symptoms of irritable bowel syndrome, celiac disease symptoms, appear to be able to reduce the likelihood of obesity, uh, that kind of thing. So again, many of these microbes tend to have important implications for human health. Faecalibacterium is, as they call it here, a habitat specialist. It comes out in poo, but there aren't going to be big colonies of it in the soil or in the plants. There's some naughty ones as well. Shigella and Salmonella. Uh, they make us ill, associated with vomiting, diarrhea, stomach upsets, food poisoning, that kind of thing. But they can also infect plants too. Obviously, plants can't vomit, but in plants, say salmonella infections can cause wilting and chlorosis. So they're quite versatile things, but they tend to have a rather negative effect on the host, whether it be a plant or a person. Um, Clostridium. Clostridium you've probably heard of. There's Clostridium difficile. It's again some years ago that was a big source of healthcare associated infections. It tends to cause diarrhea. There's Clostridium carnii that's responsible for gangrene, um, and a variety of other Clostridium species. And they can be found in soils and also in animal hosts as well. There's some more. One of the ones I quite like because it's so versatile is that one Bacillus subtilis, subtle bacteria. And that can perform a variety of beneficial roles in both the soil and plant and human microbiomes. It's a rhizobacterium. It works in symbiosis with plants' roots. Now, we've often talked about the mycorrhizal fungi. Fungus and plants seem to live and work together. The plant provides the fungus with sugar, and the fungus helps locate water and minerals over a much wider spread than the plant can manage with its roots alone. But don't forget, there's a lot of rhizobacteria as well, and Bacillus subtilis is one of the rhizobacteria, and it seems to promote plant growth. Um, in humans, it can help produce vitamins. It seems to have anti-cancer and antioxidant properties as well. Um, so antioxidants are supposed to be good for us. Well, Bacillus subtilis helps manufacture them. Um, it seems also to be associated with a reduced risk of Parkinson's disease. Uh, so some of these things, like Bacillus subtilis, can affect your risk of developing neurodegenerative disorders as well. So having some of these, friendly bacteria in your internal microbiome can have benefits for health, well-being, longevity, uh, reduced risk of morbidity and mortality. So these aren't the only ones by any manner of means. I'm just giving a few examples because it's important to be aware that it's not like the strong Charles Dowding model where it's exactly the same. There are some specialists. There are things that live wholly in the soil. There are things that live inside our intestines. But there are some habitat generalists, and with some exceptions like Salmonella and Shigella, many of them have a broadly beneficial effect on human health. Um, and also, it's worth noting that the human immune system is a funny thing. The immune system itself is a bit like gardening. If you were kept in a completely sterile environment, you probably wouldn't be very healthy, especially if you ever came out. The human immune system needs a little bit of fertilization. It needs to be sprinkled with pathogens and allergens to keep it on its toes and keep it active and keep it working. A bit like exercising muscles, perhaps. So, uh, there's probably quite a complicated relationship, which we're only just beginning to understand, between many of these microbes, both helpful and harmful, and the way the immune system works. And what else have we got? Worms. Now, one of the things about populations in countries like the UK, human populations at least, is rather uniquely in human history, we're not full of worms. Most of our ancestors would have been. They'd have had lots of helminth infections. And according to the World Health Organization, helminth worm infections affect nearly a quarter of the world's human population even today. There are a great many worms that can make their home inside the human body, and I can only touch on a handful of them. Well, touch on a handful of them. I'm not sure I want to touch them, but just a few common examples. Oh, here's the roundworm. Well, in fact, two roundworms. Ascaris lumbricoides, very common infective agent in humans and many animals. Again, I can't help admiring some of these little creatures. When you get your host to do all the hard work for you, go out and forage for food, go and look for proteins and carbohydrates. Uh, you can make yourself, over a long period of time, you can make yourself very, very simple indeed. Here's the next one. Oh, yes, here's a whipworm. Um, this is a very simple thing. A whipworm, the thicker part of the whipworm is towards the tail end. The head is very, very small. In this specimen, it's uh, kind of curved round underneath the rest of the worm's body. So there's a little narrow head section, and that attaches itself to the wall of the intestines. And like many of these things, the whipworm is basically an alimentary canal, a gut, and reproductive apparatus, and not a whole lot else. Because once again, it's been clever enough to invent sustainable architecture, i.e., humans or other animals, that does all the hard work for it. According to the paper where I got this from, this is a female specimen because at the lower end, the tail seems to be folded over, and that's a characteristic of the female of the species, apparently. And there's some also where I got this from. There's some blown up pictures where it apparently is laying some eggs, and the eggs come out, and they're like miniature rugby balls. They're that kind of shape, and they've got a little pip on either end. And they find their way into the soil, into plant material, and hence find their way into their next host. Um, uh, and this is true of things like tapeworms as well, where their ova can live in the soil for a while and then be ingested. Particularly if you've got kids playing in the garden and they, kind of they play around and then suck their fingers and so on. Uh, Once again, in countries like Britain or in Northern Europe, North America, Australasia, and so on, we've been pretty good at eliminating these kinds of infections. This, by the way, is a whipworm kind of in situ in its natural habitat. This has been uh, taken with sigmoidoscope. One of those things with a light and a camera on it that you can slip into the alimentary canal and you can take pictures of what's inside. Um, did you know you can buy sigmoidoscopes on eBay? Um, it struck me as odd when I saw them. I'm going to get one and look up a few old friends. Ha 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 ha. Sorry, I couldn't help myself there.
What's your algorithm where that pops up on your Amazon feed? That's really funny to me.
I don't know. I haven't looked for them on Amazon, but there's certainly some on eBay, and it says, you know how on eBay it says, kind of condition new, condition, etc., and some of them say condition used.
You don't want a
Well,
second-hand one.
no,
I
I,
can
ca-
tell
I
you that.
kind of, I hope they cleaned it before they'll clean it before they send it to you. Um, okay, so there's whipworm. Ooh, and here's some little beasties, hookworms. Um, uh, and once again, I've included these because the eggs come out the lower end and find their way into soil and find their way into the food chain, and hence back into animals or people, back into the host. Uh, Now, many of these things live exclusively in the intestines. There are other things around. I haven't got any pictures for you, but things like liver fluke, understandably from the name, lives in the liver. Um, Things like tapeworms, the cysts can find their way into other organs of the body, into the liver, the muscles, the brain, the eyes, if the infection is left untreated. And under the auspices of World Health Organization and various other NGOs and charities, there are major initiatives going on to try and reduce helminth infections in humans around the world. Uh, there's organizations called things like Children Without Worms, for example, that's promoting the use of anti-helminthic medications. Um, so yeah, so there's lots of things that can live inside us, and for much of the human story, we had some of these little companions inside us to keep us company. Um, okay, well, I've been going for nearly three-quarters of an hour, so there are many other things I could talk about. There are a whole variety of other both micro and macro inhabitants of the human microbiome. Uh, but perhaps at this point I shall pause and say, yes, we've got a very permeable body, and maybe if I stop sharing there for a moment and we won't see each other again, you are screen sharing. Stop share. There. Okay. Well, if anybody's got any, oh, there's loads of things in the chat. Let's have a look at the chat.
Brown, do you want me to sift through? I'll sift through the
Oh,
comments.
you have a sift.
Yeah.
There's some comments about the weather.
Oh yeah, we're all old
Oh,
friends. We only catch up once a month, don't we, guys?
yeah,
So we do like a
absolutely.
little chin wag.
Hey, I've had some weather. I had my place blanketed in snow a couple of weeks ago. It was fantastic.
So we so some people are saying, will this be recorded because they're finding it fascinating?
Yeah.
That's cool. Some people are
Mm,
enjoying the Charles Dowding stuff.
mm.
Um, Professor Tim Spector is the gut biome specialist and considers the
Oh,
biome
yes,
as
yeah.
a further hormone, i.e., the metabolite end product of
Mm,
the biome acts as hormones to the human host. Much of
mm,
his work links health illness conditions with the makeup of the biome. That's
mm. Yeah, I suppose what's interesting is that we're all whether we were a microbe or, a complex multicellular organism like us, we work on much of the same chemistry. There's a lot of hydrocarbons about, for example. Now, compared to some living things, kind of our role is quite limited. Plants, trees are fantastic. They're like little solar-powered chemical factories. They can make a lot more interesting things than we can. Um, uh, but yes. So there are, kind of there are hormones, there are enzymes, there are, kind of a whole variety of compounds through which this communication is achieved. Another thing, going back to Staphylococcus aureus for a minute, when you look at bacterial colonies, they can share advantages and adaptations very quickly sometimes, um, uh, by means of transposons. Now, people like us, or things like us, we've got to rely on evolution, and change takes place very, very slowly by comparison to a single lifetime. Hundreds of thousands of generations are needed before things change very much. But, once a Staphylococcus aureus colony has worked out how to combat antibiotics, for example, once a few of them have done so, they can spread that awareness around very, very quickly. So, the chemical messengers between microbes and their host, or between microbes and other microbes, kind of a fascinating area, and I think that's, well worth further study.
So you know when they encourage people to, if they're doing gardening, not to bother with gloves,
Mm.
to get the soil on their hands because they say it can combat depression and it can be really good
Yeah.
because a lot of depression they say is to do with the gut microbiome.
Oh, yeah. Yes, yes. It seems to have something to do with mood. I'm not entirely sure what difference soil on the hands might make, but it may be. Something chemical. It may be something to do with microbes, but equally it may be to do with, kind of, oh, kind of, I like to, get my hands dirty. I like to, kind of interact with nature, that kind of thing. And it may be the psychological and psychosocial effects as well.
Yeah.
Because we know with many of these things, the body's capable of doing this sort of thing to itself. You know, Moods go down and go up. People's capabilities may change. People may develop, kind of allergic symptoms. Sometimes not just in contact with an allergen, but if they think they've contacted an allergen.
Mhm.
We've got another friend who's was a nurse for many years, and certainly from the 1980s to, well, the present, putting rubber gloves on for most procedures became routine. Once people started getting concerned about HIV in the 80s, and he developed a latex allergy. Now, sometimes he gets those symptoms when he thinks he's come into contact with rubber,
Really?
even if there isn't any. Um, so sometimes the what you might call the placebo effect is demonstrably very strong. Um,
Psychosomatic,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So I wonder if you talk about the different, like the permeable membrane between us and the outer world. Like I suppose with your hands, that's like tough skin, isn't it? But
Yeah.
Kate asks the question, is there a greater benefit to use volatile oils in their natural state? So she talks about rolling around in a woodland or touching plants than using
Hmm.
distilled essential oil. So I suppose that ties
I
in with what
wonder. That's an interesting question. I must admit, I'm not a biochemist by background. I'm just an amateur. Um, does anybody else in the audience have a view on that? It would be interesting. Stick your hand up or stick a comment in the chat. Having said that, I think there's, clearly there are people who do things like, use oils therapeutically or do things like aromatherapy and so on. And um, with those kinds of approaches, I often wonder whether it was it's the atmosphere, not just the smell of the oil, but the fact that somebody nice is paying you very close attention. You're in a therapeutic environment with a, kind of, with little candles going in the background, and nice relaxing music going on, and there's all those kinds of things going on, as well as the
you're saying it's
volatile
too many
compounds in the
variables.
oil. And similarly, kind of go and have a roll around in the woodlands, and, kind of feel the moss beneath your bare feet, and um, listen to the birds' song, and, enjoy the dappled sunlight, or, whatever else happens there. Those kinds of things. Yes, of course, there's, phytoncides being secreted all around you, but equally there's lots of other things that will make a difference to mood, well-being, how well you sleep afterwards, and so on. So, but that kind of complexity is part and parcel of the human condition. So, you know, if it works, it's probably worth doing.
Diana adds touching a sprig of lavender or rosemary is so much nicer than using the distilled oils. And I think,
Yeah.
yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
Yes, because it's kind of it engages more of the senses, doesn't it? The
Yeah.
texture and the kind of the smell of it on your fingers, and there's all sorts of new things to experience with live plants as well. You never know quite how they're going to smell or taste because they're natural materials. It depends on where they've been growing. Um, that kind of thing. So, and sometimes it's, depending on the age of the plant, is it a fresh new shoot? Is it something that's been baking in the sun all summer?
Mm.
Is it something that's, just been, had a nice shower of rain? All that kind of stuff, can make quite a big difference too. Mm.
Michael, he echoes what you said, Brown, about. He said, people tend to be rather reductionist, wishing to isolate effects of single ingredients, but collaborative interactions. So, like you say,
Mm. Mm.
if you look at it, is it the phytochemicals from the plants?
Yeah.
But if you're in the woodland as a whole, and like you say,
Mm.
yeah, that's sort of
Yeah.
you can't. They've
Having
got
said,
the
having,
measurable
hmm,
bits. Yeah,
yeah. I mean, having said that, sometimes I think there might be a case for being very reductive and only looking at one variable at a time. Because, for example, if I were to undertake a medical treatment, I'd like to know that I was going to do better than the control group, for
yeah.
example.
Everyone wants to be better than average.
Yes, or better than the placebo group.
Yeah,
So, doing those kinds of studies where you try and hold all variables constant, apart from the one you're interested in, it does have a place, uh, because, otherwise, we might, well, maybe there's some wisdom embedded in traditional healing practices, maybe, the ways of our ancestors have something to offer us, but we won't necessarily know until we start trying to isolate things and work out what's actually making a difference. Having said that, with many of these things, whether it's aromatherapy, whether it's essential oils, whether it's forest bathing, yeah, let's just enjoy the whole experience.
yeah.
Um,
I think you're right. I think we're all into small woodlands, and for whatever reasons, but I think we all feel
mhm,
better after being up in our woodlands. Perhaps unless we're like chainsawing down wood and we're
mhm.
absolutely knackered, but even then, I think
Yeah,
we feel better for being in the woodlands. So.
yeah. Okay. Are there any other comments in the? Mm,
Kate says sometimes essential oil mixes can smell like cat's urine, but it's
yeah.
apparently
Mm,
chemical absorbed to some extent through the skin. So yeah,
mm,
I think
yeah.
don't have it. Yeah,
Mm.
but she suspects that post-processing essential oils don't have any microbes left in them. I tell you,
Well, I doubt if there's anything much in essential oils. They're perhaps not a very hospitable environment. They're often, they're often quite, the aromatic component is often quite concentrated. So, it'd be like expecting something to live in vinegar almost.
yeah, there's a big thing about having live cultured like kimchi at the
Oh
moment.
yes, yes. There's all those kinds of things that you can get. Not only all the kind of live and probiotic yogurts, but things like kimchi, things fermented stuff, seems to be very popular these days. Um, so yeah, now as I've just indicated, there's a certain amount of fermentation that goes on inside our guts anyway with the microbes that live there. But sometimes it might be helpful to, if the fermentation process has started off earlier. Um, so.
Kate, you recommend, I can't, I'm trying to scroll back up, but Kate, you recommended a book higher up. Can you just tell us what book that was, please, if you've got your microphone on?
Hello. No, I was asking for a book recommendation because
Oh,
it's
okay.
so interesting that soil plant gut axis. I've quickly looked up the Ma et al. 2025 link, so I've grabbed that article. But are there any kind of
Oh, gosh.
user friendly books that you
Oh, I'll
might
tell you what I was reading a little while ago. No, I don't think it's on the table behind on the chest of drawers behind me, but there was a thing called mycelium running that I read a while ago about fungi, which was quite, sort of popular science, accessibly written kind of thing. If you're interested in fungi,
Mycelium
uh,
running.
yeah. Um, one of the things I read, I have no idea whether you can still get it, but one of the things I read as a child, was a thing that was just called Life on Man, which was a kind of paperback from our local library, and I can't remember the author, but that had got a lot of stuff about, things that live on human beings.
I read that, and it talks about
Oh
what
yes, it's the
eyelashes, and that was yeah, that's I
hmm.
didn't love that bit.
Oh yes, there's lots lots of little things that mites that can live in hair follicles and all that kind of stuff. Yes, that's very much the sort of thing that
Sweet
I
dreams.
got. Yeah, I'm just trying to think. Well, the thing is though, because I, kind of work in the university and my stock in trade is trying to find academic articles about stuff, then I tend to go for um, well, academic articles first and rather than the more popular stuff, unfortunately. So I'm perhaps not the best expert on that. Um,
James has just popped the link in the chat about mycelium running for people to have a
oh,
little
right. Oh, somebody's found it
read.
already. Okay,
Yeah.
good. Yeah, brilliant.
So, has anybody else got any more questions?
Mm.
I've got a question while people,
Okay, let's.
when something is a host, or like it's a parasite of some kind, why does it cause a or if it's symbiotic, well, why does a host always cause some sort of negative effect to the human,
Yeah. Well, what, again, I'm not a
the
biologist
host?
by trade, but one of the things that I've certainly read is that when you see a major negative effect on the host, that's a relatively recently established relationship. When they've been going on for a long time, then there's more commensal and more symbiotic kind of relationship. Um,
Right. Okay. So that can
so,
be fine.
when a novel disease reaches a population, then the morbidity and mortality can be very high. Once it's been around for a while, it's often less critical. Uh, in the same sort of way, kind of ants and plants, things like leafcutter ants, can do a lot of damage to plants. But then, in cases where the ants and the plants have lived together for many hundreds of thousands of generations, then yes, I mean the plants lose a few leaves, but equally the ants can ward off other potential predators. Um,
Okay.
because not very many things like being stung by ants. So, there are mutual benefits. Um, for example.
Michael
So,
says this can
yeah,
be seen clearly in malaria and HIV.
mm,
I think as time has gone on, is it? What you're
yeah,
saying, Michael? Are you saying as time has gone on, it's less destructive to the host?
yeah. But also, I think the other thing that you can see with illnesses is the way that if you're thinking about people in, say, Britain and Northern Europe, some of the things that were big killers a little over 100 years ago, are now much less virulent. Now, that's probably because we've got a lot more food inside us, calorific intake, we're not subject to the socio-economic stresses of unemployment in 19th century London or the big Great Depression or the general strike and so on. So we're generally speaking larger and healthier specimens anyway. Um, and also, there was another thing that happened, scarlet fever. Does anybody remember scarlet fever? Um,
My granddad had it.
yeah. Well, my mother back in the 1930s was had scarlet fever, and that was considered to be one of the big killers at the time. And ambulances had a special red blanket that they wrapped the people who'd got scarlet fever in, to, just to show how dangerous they were. And they took her away to the isolation hospital. This was in the northeast near Newcastle, and the isolation hospital was kind of out on the moors somewhere outside Newcastle. Um, but around about that time, scarlet fever became considerably less lethal. Um, and people get it now sometimes and they don't even know they have it. Uh,
So I'll tell you what, I'm going to end it with the question. I'm going to ask Michael to just elaborate if he wanted to. I wondered if he wanted to say something.
Well, only briefly, HIV is catastrophic to the human host. It's come very new and it's
yeah.
catastrophic. You might say with time it'll become more modulated, but malaria is a really good example. That the four strains of malaria, only one is really, really harmful, falciparum, and that has
Mm,
come much more recently into the human and
mm,
evolved much more recently than the other three strains or four strains, and
yeah.
so which don't do nearly as much harm. So as time goes by, as I think Chris also says, it's natural selection. It serves a pathogen well to keep its host going, not to kill it off.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, or there are examples of things. I'm trying to think of those kind of parasites that oh, I don't know, lay their eggs inside a host, and then the host becomes the food for the uh, when the eggs hatch and the larvae are eating, that kind of thing. I'm sure you've seen that on TV programs. I can't remember it, can't think of an
Cuckoo bee
example.
is a good one.
Yeah, that sort of thing. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Brown, I think for the final question, just to alleviate, because I've those hookworms are going to be embedded in my brain for my nightmares. People were laughing at my face while you were talking about that.
Yeah, right.
I'm not a very good poker player. I'm going to end it with the final question that's been typed. Is there a way to encourage a healthy soil microbiome, e.g., in our garden or, of course, our woodlands if we are lucky enough to own one? So, what can we do to encourage a healthy soil microbiome? Let's end
Yeah,
with that.
well, um, I suppose one of the things you can do is you can kind of leave it alone. Um, hence Charles Dowding and his no dig model of gardening, the less you disturb the soil. If you kind of keep adding organic matter on top in the form of compost, then the soil ecology becomes richer. If you don't turn the soil over, you're not disrupting all the mycorrhizal fungi. They don't have to regrow all their mycelia every time you dig the soil. That kind of thing. Another uh, social media personality that you might have seen is somebody called Joel Ashton, and there's a load of YouTube videos, Wild Your Garden with Joel Ashton. And in one of his recent videos, he said something similar. Perhaps not specifically about the soil microbiome, but in terms of wilding and rewilding generally, that if you just kind of give the species that like inhabiting that environment a chance, then you'll see wildflowers, you'll see insects, and also beneath your feet the microbes and fungi in the soil will be having a good time as well, presumably. So, so sometimes, kind of doing less is more. I've certainly noticed this just anecdotally on my own piece of land where um, back in, let me see, when I was looking at it with a view to buying it in 2018, I went round there with a friend one day in May, and he said, I can't hear any birds singing. And as we stopped and listened, I couldn't hear any birds singing either. But even with, for 6, 7 years of tree growth, now the bird song, especially on a spring morning, is deafening. You just have to open the gate a crack and nature floods back in. And, I've been talking about above ground things like, kind of wildflowers and trees and birds, but the same sort of things going on beneath our feet as well. Um, Especially if you can introduce more organic matter. Plants and indeed fungi are morbid little blighters. They love growing in the decomposing remains of their compatriots. Um,
Yeah. Well, Thank you, Brown.
Okay.
I think that's I think we can all agree that was really, really interesting and lots of food for thought. We've got lots of things that have come up there. Nick has said in answer to the question about that, what the soil microbiome, look up Korean natural farming. That's an avenue. That's
Ooh.
a
Oh yeah.
hole, if you will, that we
Mhm.
can all go down. Carolyn says fascinating. Kate says really enjoyed it and learned so much. Thank you. In fact, everybody's saying, yeah, great. Thank you so much. Brown, you always bring something a little bit
Ah, yeah.
left
Oh,
field
you're
for us.
you're very kind. Thank you so
No, we
much.
love it. And
Well,
thank you so much.
what I'm going to do now is I'm going to sling my possessions in my Land Rover and head off over to Wales this evening, because tomorrow somebody's delivering me a tractor.
Brown, you did an impulse purchase of a tractor. Brown told me about this, and
Yeah,
I
yeah,
thought that was
was
so cool.
rather foolish over Christmas, and they were going to deliver it just over a week ago, but we had the snow and everything, and the roads in that part of Wales hadn't been ploughed.
Brown, have you waited to do this talk before you go off to Wales for us?
Yeah,
Oh, thanks so
Oh,
much. That's
yeah.
really
Well,
decent.
it does it works for me as well because now it's about 7 o'clock or so. I'm in Leicester. My place is in Mid Wales, so I've got to go on the M6 through, Birmingham, Wolverhampton, stuff like that. And it's, during business hours, it's like a traffic jam. Um, Whereas by now the traffic will have thinned out a bit, and I'll be able to keep my foot down. You don't usually think of a Land Rover as a vehicle for high performance motoring, but you can certainly get a move on when there's no other cars on the road.
Well, just all of those cars that slow down. Just think, when you're driving your tractor, they'll all be behind you. It's
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Yeah.
listen, I think I speak on behalf of all of us when I say we want a photo of you and your tractor. Send it
Oh,
to me.
right.
I'll put it on the
Well, I'll
screen.
tell you what. Yes. Well, I usually upload photos to the Flickr photo sharing site.
Oh, I've got your
So,
links for
oh,
that. So
yeah, but I
yeah,
don't mind. I don't mind who looks at that. So,
okay,
hopefully, I'll be able to put some pictures up before too long. Mm,
great. All right. Well,
mm,
Brown,
mm.
you best set off. Drive safe and take care.
Okay.
And thank
Right.
you everybody for
Right.
joining
Okay.
in.
Bye bye. Thanks.
Take care. Bye
bye.
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 Thanks everybody.